Read One Communications presents The Scholar's Chair. Tonight on the program, a book review authored by Dr. Seyyed Hossein Nasr. Our focus is from his book entitled The Garden of Truth, the Vision and Promise of Sufism, Islam's Mythical Tradition. We will start on Chapter 2, Truth, the knowledge that illuminates and delivers from the bondage of ignorance. The Holy Quran states, "Truth hath come and falsehood has vanished away. Verily falsehood is ever certain to vanish." The term haqq is a Quranic term. It means both truth and reality, and is in fact a name of God, who is usually referred to in Sufi literature alternatively as Allah or al-Khaliq, for God is both absolute truth and absolute reality. According to Sufism, the supreme goal of human life is to obtain truth, which is also reality, the source of all reality, and whose attainment, as also stated by Christ, makes us free, delivering us from the bondage of ignorance. Although deeply involved with love, and also on a certain level with action, Sufism is at the highest level a path of knowledge, a knowledge that is unifying and illuminating, a knowledge whose highest object is the truth as such, that is, God, and subsequently the knowledge of things in relation to God. There is such a thing as the truth, and it can be known. This is the first of all certitudes, for which flow all other certitudes of human life. The knowledge of the truth is like the light of the sun, while love is like the heat that always accompanies that light. Dr. Nasr further suggests that there are three levels of obtaining certainty of the truth. The first level is the science of certainty, ilm al-yaqeen, which is hearing or reading a description of an object or experience from a reliable source. Second level is the eye of certainty, in Arabic, attain al-yaqeen, which is gaining certainty of its existence through direct vision. Finally, there is the truth of certainty, haqq al-yaqeen, or again, what can also be understood as the certainty of truth, which is like being consumed by its reality. The goal of the life of this spiritual person is to ascend this ladder of certainty until he or she is consumed of the truth, to which some Christian mystics refer to being consumed in God. In a famous verse, Rumi says, "The result of my life is contained in but 3 words. I was unripe, I ripened, and I was consumed." He is referring here to the same reality. Here is first of all certainty that there is such a thing as the truth. Further, on the basis of this first certainty, one can advance to higher levels of certainty of the truth until one is consumed by it, and one enters the garden of truth itself. Christ said, "In my Father's house are many mansions." This saying has, of course, several meanings. One of them is that there are many religions that lead to God. It also means that there are different types of spiritual paths, some based upon sacrifice and selfless action, some of faith and devotion, some on love, and some on knowledge. Since Islam is the religion of unity, its inner dimension, which is Sufism, integrates these different possibilities within itself. But also, since Islam is based ultimately on the knowledge of the oneness of God, the way of knowledge is central to the Sufi path, although this knowledge is always combined with love, faith, and correct action. That is why many of those who know in a unifying and illuminating manner, and who are called Gnostics, have often composed the most sublime mystical love poetry. The knowledge of which Sufism speaks is not mental knowledge, but a light that illuminates the beholders of this knowledge, and in fact all around it, and finally returns the human being to its source, the supernal sun. On the highest level, the subject as well as the object of this knowledge is God. The Gnostics of Sufism is called the one who knows by God and not one who knows God. For ultimately, it is only the divine spark within us that can know the divine. Our duty is to remove the veils within that prevent such a unifying knowledge from taking place. The prophet has said, knowledge is light. And one can add that the Quran speaks of God being the light of the heavens and the earth. Now, existence itself is a ray of light that issues from the divine. Knowledge is therefore also being. The more one knows in a principal manner, and not only discursively, the more one is. On the highest level, the knower, knowledge, and the known are one. In any case, the quest for the truth lies at the heart of Sufism, and the goal of the adept is to be able to ascend the levels of certitude until one's separate existence is consumed by the truth and one is given access to the garden of truth. Sufi doctrine and its function in the spiritual life. The description and theoretical exposition of the truth is contained in Sufi doctrine, while the realization of the truth is possible only through spiritual practice. Sufi doctrine, which is also called theoretical gnosis, is itself the fruit of spiritual realization and not simply philosophical speculation. It is presented to those in quest of the truth as a map of the structure of reality and the road that is to be followed to transcend the cosmic labyrinth. One might say that the Sufi masters first climbed the cosmic mountain and then flew into the sky of the divine presence. After that, upon descending, drew a map for other climbers who wished to reach the summit and fly to the beyond. Sufi doctrine is like the lure of certainty, and its realization, the truth of certainty. From the operative point of view, the doctrine is presented, and then its truths realized. But in reality, it is the realization of the truths of the path that have made it possible in the first place for master expositors of Sufi doctrine to formulate their teachings and guide men and women on their journey to the One. Theoretical gnosis appears as a theoria in the original Greek sense of vision of the truth. But in fact, it issues from consummation by that truth. Only then can it act as guide for those who wish to reach that truth. Sufi doctrine or theoretical gnosis seems to begin with the mind. But for its full understanding, it must be accompanied by practice. which involves the whole of one's being and requires faith. Through this process, what appears at first as a concept in the mind becomes a luminous presence that transforms one's whole being, further informing the theory or doctrine. Sufi doctrine is, in a sense, both the beginning and the end of the Sufi path. It is beginning because it presents to the seeker, before he or she undertakes the spiritual quest, the basic truths concerning the nature of reality, and finally the crowning truth concerning ultimate reality as such. It is in the end because the goal of Sufism is the attainment of that gnosis or ma'rifah described theoretically in the text of Sufi doctrine, but now realized with one's whole being. The lure of certainty in which we hear about in the fire of truth cannot be but led ultimately through our quest after the fire to discovering it and being consumed by it. Tradition itself, the Quran along with its inspired commentaries, the sayings of the Prophet, hadith, and of many sages and saints, traditional literature, and other sources provide for those embarking upon the path of homogeneous religious and intellectual eminence and the basic elements of the truth necessary to obtain the goal. Today, we no longer live in such a situation, even in many parts of the Islamic world, especially in the West. Most people no longer hold a homogeneous spiritual and metaphysical worldview from which one can begin. To make Sufism understood to Westerners in such a situation, it is therefore necessary, even more so than the traditional Islamic circles, to begin with a fuller exposition of Sufi doctrine. This in turn involves not only presenting these doctrines, but also clearing the ground of errors that prevent the mind from understanding the doctrines involved. In a world in which Agnosticism and Skepticism were very rare, one did not have to remove such errors before speaking of the existence of God. Today, obviously, the situation is very different. Ideally, therefore, it would be necessary to clear the ground of all prevalent errors, according to the Sufi point of view, and authentic metaphysics in general, such as secular humanism, rationalism, imperialism, behavioralism, deconstructionism, and so forth, which clutter the minds of so many men and women today. Only then can one present to them the truth which Sufi doctrine seeks to expound and explain. Those who remain rooted in the modern and now postmodern mindset, in which truth itself in its absolute sense is denied, and metaphysics is not even considered a possibility. What is said about the truth here can at least make them better acquainted with the worldview that underlies and defines Sufism in its diverse manifestations. Nevertheless, whenever necessary, reference will be made to errors that prevent the truths of Sufism from being comprehended. The Divine Reality by Professor Nasr. Professor Nasr continues to write, "The highest truth is the truth of the highest, and the knowledge of the supreme reality is supreme knowledge." Although the principal knowledge is at the heart and within the very substance of the intellect, the supreme principle cannot be known in the ordinary manner of knowing to which our minds have become habituated. It cannot be comprehended by the mind because the very term comprehend is derived from a Latin word meaning to encompass or to embrace. But the divine reality is infinite and cannot be encompassed by anything. The only way to know it is to purge into the sea of divinity, to swim in the ocean of the Godhead, to use the well-known image of Master Erhard. Our intellect is like an arrow that can reach the sun and is given the power by God to anticipate the knowledge gained by this union. That is why we are able to speak about God and even make the assertion that God in his essence is beyond all that we can say of him. At the heart of Sufi doctrine and theoretical gnosis stands the reality which is unutterable and yet makes all metaphysical uttering possible, and furthermore manifests itself in categories that can be known in positive categories. The subject of Sufi metaphysics is said in classical texts to be the unconditioned absolute reality, which is not even conditioned by absoluteness. Yet this metaphysics begins and ends with the truth of this supreme reality because it is the origin and the end of all things, and its realization the supreme goal of human life. As mentioned in previous chapter, the supreme principle in both the absolute transcendent reality and the absolutely immanent self, who determines the ultimate reality of human beings and defines what it means to be human. The divine essence is beyond all determination and definition and corresponds to what certain Christian mystics call Godhead or divine ground. It is the essence of the divine order of God. In the Islamic terms, God, Allah, denotes the divine essence as well as the divine names and qualities which make creation and manifestation possible. The name Allah in Arabic denotes at once Godhead and God as the divine person and creator. It contains therefore both the impersonal and personal aspects of the divine. Allah is God, understood in the full metaphysical understanding of the term, and not according to particular confessional or theological definitions. Allah is reality, which is at once absolute, infinite, and pure goodness and perfection. God is the absolute, the one before whom no relativity may even be said to exist. He is the infinite end that in him is to be found all possibility. It must be remembered here that the word possibility, potentiality, and potency are all related etymologically. This truth is an indication of the fact that possibility and the power to bring all existence into being are related in the divine order. God is also infinite and absolute goodness and perfection, as well as the source of all goodness and perfection in the created order. Sufi metaphysics has used several symbolic languages to express the truths with which it is concerned, including symbols connected to light, to the features of the human face, and to love. But most of all, it has relied on the revelation by God in the Quran of his names and qualities. There is subsequently in Sufism the very important science of the divine names, which Muslims believe have been revealed directly by God as a means of unveiling his nature to the extent that he has wished to the prophet and through him to the followers of his last revelation. This science has both a theoretical and practical import. Theoretically, it depicts a metaphysical vision of the divine and the cosmology that flows from it, and practically it makes possible access to the divine, for it is through the names of God, the sacred names revealed by God in the Quran concerning himself, that men and women are able to return to God and to realize who they really are. To call God by his beautiful names, to use the Quranic terminology, results in receiving his answer once he himself has revealed these names as his names. It results in drawing near unto him. In this science, a distinction is made, first of all, between God's essence, his name and qualities, and his acts. Although the essence itself is beyond all names and determinations, being the black light, which is black because of the intensity of its luminosity, certain names pertain to it and it alone, and never to his acts, which constitute his creation. Such names include Huwa, the essence, El-Rahman, the all-good, El-Rahim, the infinitely merciful, and El-Ahad, the one. Then there is the level of the names and qualities, which are first self-determinations or self-identifications of the essence. At this level are names pertaining to various divine qualities such as generosity, Karama in Arabic, with the corresponding name of El-Karim, the generous, and a quality of knowing, Ilm, of which the corresponding divine name is El-Alim, the knower. Finally, there are names such as al-Khaliq, meaning the creator, pertaining to God's acts, which are the foundation of his creation. In the deepest sense, creation is not only a result of a divine act, but the whole created order, an act of God itself. At the level of the essence, there is absolute oneness, but on the level of the names and qualities, multiplicity is introduced, although without destroying any way the divine unity, since each name and quality is a self-determination of the essence. God is at once just and forgiving, wrathful and merciful, although it is written on the divine throne, according to the sacred sayings of the prophet, quoted often by Sufis, "Verily my mercy precedeth my wrath." This hadith means that although God is just and is wrathful towards evildoers, his mercy comes before his justice, and he forgives those who have committed evil acts, yet turn to him in earnestness and with their whole being. Were it not for this ordering of the names in the divine order, there would be no positive dualities observable in creation, such as male and female or yin and yang distinctions. Such dualities must, however, be distinguished from false dualism, such as gods of the good and evil, which one finds in certain dualistic religions, from the dualism implied in the ordering of the divine names in Islam does not in any way distract from the oneness of the divine principle. The whole universe comes into being through the interplay with the various determinations of the divine names and qualities. The names of God are not simply words in the ordinary sense, but realities, each of which reflect an aspect of the divine reality. Moreover, in every religion, each name that plays both a cosmological and a salvific role is sanctified through the revelation by the reality to which the name refers. In any case, the science of the name is, according to the Sufis, the key for knowledge of ourselves, of the world, and ultimately of God, as well as the means to return to our origin. The oneness of being, the Sufi science of the divine reality, cannot be fully understood without discussing the famous doctrine of the transcendent oneness, or the unity of being. To understand this doctrine, which many have called the crowning jewel of Sufism, it is necessary to turn our attention first to the universal hierarchy of reality. There is, first of all, the ultimate reality, which is the beyond being, and which some have called non-being. That is, a reality that transcends even being taken as a positive category. It can be symbolized by the darkness or black light standing above and not below light, and its polarization by a prism within various colors. It is the aspect of the divine that is above as well as within the creative aspect of God, and does not participate in the creative act. The first determination is beyond being, is being, the ontological principle, which is God in his aspect as person and creator, the reality we address as thou and our Lord. The truth of the oneness of being can be fully known only by being experienced spiritually. When the veil of the ego is removed within the human being, the inner divine spark sees and knows the divine everywhere behind the veils of multiplicity. God becomes the eye with which the human being sees, and the human being becomes the eye with which God sees the world. In reality, God is the light with which we see all things. That is why we cannot see him in the ordinary sense. As Mahmud Shabisri, the 14th century Persian poet, said in a celebrated verse in his Rose Garden of Divine Mysteries, "Thou art like the eye, and he the light of the eye, who has never been able to see with the eye that which the eye sees." To speak of being is to speak of reality. Now if God is al-Haq, that is, the absolute truth, the absolute reality, or absolute being, which in this case may be said to embrace both beyond being and being, and he is at the same time el-Ahad, the one. There cannot be two independent realities. That would ultimately involve dualism in the principal order and negation of both the oneness and the absoluteness of God. The world appears to us as multiplicity, and the goal of the spiritual life is to ascend from this multiplicity to unity, to see the one in the many, and the many integrated into one. Now, the doctrine of the oneness of being does not negate the reality of multiplicity, nor does it claim that God is the world, and the world in its totality is God, a position held by pantheists. How could a metaphysics that speaks of categorically the transcendence of God be accused of pantheism? What the Sufis asserts is not that God is the world, but that the world is miraculously plugged in God. Existence is a manifestation of being, and all existence issues from and belongs to being, in the same way that the rays of the sun are finally nothing but the sun. Some Sufis and Islamic philosophers have interpreted the doctrine of the oneness of being to mean that all levels of being come from the one being, that all the rays of light emanate from the sun, while many Sufis claim that the highest level of understanding there is, in fact, only the one and absolute being.